Oh, hey there. It's been at least 4 months, felt like half a year, maybe even a full year since we've last assembled the three of us into the same Zoom room. We took some time off to let the situation unfold, to let the numbers develop, to see whether some of our predictions were correct, were incorrect, or lay somewhere in the gray zone in between. But I'm not here to talk about any of that just yet. First, I've got to introduce in the other two folks in this Zoom room. I want to start off by introducing what could possibly be a Guinness World Record for the busiest unemployed man in sports. It's Bob Turo. He's our expert. He's put on the power suit with, I assume, some Canadian landmark directly behind him. Bob, welcome to the show.
It's the Spires at Churchill Downs, and I'm glad the band is back together, guys.
The band is back together. Couldn't have been farther from Canada, Churchill Downs, but not real up on my on my geography in terms of where buildings are. But a man who also is not up on his geography in terms of where buildings are, but a man who has put on what looks to be a collared polo for this evening. The taller the hair, the more confident the man. And there is no man with taller hair than Dan Kay. Dan, you have seen great response on social media to some of the stuff we've been posting. Welcome to the show. Talk us through the response.
I popped the hair for the pomp and circumstance that we've brought to the internet over the last week. And this is all the work of us just isolating Bob Turo for a month in a dark space with a lot of coffee and some time on his hands. And this man has churned out numbers that have the internet talking. We did over 1 million social media impressions in the last week of time with this content that has gone out. Over 1,000 direct shares that we can track from you that are on the grid. The Lucas types that are off the grid, a little tougher to track your shares, but shared throughout the hockey world. Lucas, multiple articles written about the numbers that have been dropped, about the state of hockey right now as we sit. And a man has been making a lot of predictions. What I will tell you is that man that has made a lot of predictions, we will be asking him your questions that you reached out with on social media when we get to the conclusion of this. Whatever hasn't already been answered on tonight's show, we will get answered by the end of this one. That is my job. I am here for you. I'm the voice of the people. I'm the one you guys like. Lucas is here to keep us on track, and Bob is here to dive into the information. Bob, state of the hockey union address right now. Where do we stand today after you've poured through these numbers? You've just dove into the details. Where's the sport of hockey sitting right now from your point of view?
I think you can throw out all of the historical numbers prior to the NCAA rule change allowing the CHL to have players compete in the NCAA. And let's just come back and really put this in context. We care about NHL hockey players. We're going to talk a lot about who's playing in the USHL and the CHL and the NCAA and all of that. But it really comes down to who's going to have the bragging rights to say that they supply the National Hockey League with their players. And what we have found out, and we'll show you this, the 16 and 17-year-olds, as we predicted, it looks like they're walking in droves to the CHL. And the question, and this was always the question, the only question that we had, is where are those elite players going to be playing when they're 18 and 19-year-olds? So that's kind of what we're going to dive into tonight. What are the trends? What's happening? We're going to hear a lot of rumors tomorrow in a couple of nights with the NHL draft. We've got a kid by the name of McKenna that we're all waiting to hear. Is he actually going to the NCAA? It sounds like he is. And what will be the follow-up with that? But I think we have to go back in time and talk historical NHL numbers and where the players come from. And for the longest period of time after the wall came down, historically, it was 55% of the players in the National Hockey League came from the CHL, and 25% of the players came from the NCAA. Over the course of the last decade, here's kind of what's happened. The CHL has gone down to 47%, and we'll show some graphics in a little bit. The NCAA has gone up to 29%, and Europe has played a factor as well. So the CHL's lost a little bit of ground here over the course of the last 10, 15 years. But as I said, throw it all out the window, because a lot of the predictions that we made, specifically regarding strategy with the CHL, you can see what's happening organically, not strategically. You can see what's happening in the NCAA as far as CHL players flipping over to the NCAA. I don't know of any strategy they have. It's really just teams organically picking up players. And so as we move forward, it's really all about strategy and the execution of that strategy that's going to determine who is going to supply the National Hockey League with their players in this new environment where the CHL players are now allowed to play Division I hockey. So, Lucas, I think the first thing that we should probably do is some recap of where we were, so we can lay the groundwork as to where we're going. And maybe the first thing that we should put up on the screen is the age breakdown in the National Hockey League. So what you're going to see here is, if you take a look at the top, the age breakdown of the NHL players that were rostered on November 11th in 2024, there was one 40-year-old. There was four 39-year-olds. Lucas, scroll up a little bit. You can see there was one 18-year-old, three 19-year-olds, and I've got one number in red, and that number in red is the 22-year-olds. That's where you really start to see players entering the National Hockey League. And I don't care where the players are coming from. It's going to still be 22 years of age. So the real question is, are they going to come from the CHL? Most of them through the AHL and then on to the NHL, but there's going to be guys like Celebrini that go directly to the National Hockey League. Or are the players going to come from the NCAA, maybe a little bit more directly into the National Hockey League because they're an older player, but most of them through the AHL, and we're gonna find out. And really, again, it comes back to the question of, where are the elite 18 and 19-year-olds going to be playing, and that will determine whether it's the NCAA or the CHL that has the bragging rights to being the official supplier to the National Hockey League. Let's flip over to the nationality of NHL hockey players. So you can see on November the 7th, when the rule change happened, we made an assumption that most of the 16 and 17-year-olds in North America would walk to the CHL and be playing their 16 and 17-year-olds there. And make a note, Dan and Lucas, we've got to come back to show that this is actually happening. So make sure we come back there. Let's talk about CHL strategy. No, you know what? Yeah, let's talk about CHL strategy. So back on pod 2, I think it was, we talked about what we thought the CHL would do to secure the best 16 and 17-year-olds in North America. Forget about the Europeans right now. And we'll show you actually what's happening, but it's true. The CHL's killing it right now. They're getting the best players in North America. The second thing the CHL wanted to do is they wanted to send their age outs to the NCAA to save on scholarship money that they would normally have to pay when a player went to U Sport. Now those players are going to the NCAA, and we'll show that. Okay. But the CHL have already changed their education packages to try and lock players in. It used to be that you would sign and you would get a 4-year deal. Now it's you play 1 year, you get 1 year. And if you leave early, you're not going to be getting anything because the NCAA is going to be picking it up. And they're going to be saving a bunch of dough here as far as their obligations and liabilities to these players. The third thing we predicted was the CHL was going to go after the best Euros. One thing I'll say about the CHL, because we looked at nationality a little bit earlier, the CHL is like the National Hockey League. They don't care where a player comes from. They just want the best players who are heading to the National Hockey League. And the CHL, just like we predicted, made a change. Instead of having 2 picks per team in the CHL import draft that's going to happen on July the 2nd, they made it 3. And so we're going to dig into where are they going to get these Europeans? Hint, because we're going to show this, it's not just Europe. It's Europeans who have already come to North America who are playing in the United States Hockey League. Fourth prediction, monetization, expansion. Last time we were together, it looked like Youngstown and Muskegon were going to be in the Ontario Hockey League. My understanding is the NHL got involved and put a kibosh to that. What the specifics are on that, I don't know. But they were teed up and ready to go, we were told, and now it's on hold. From what I hear now is those 2 teams are still interested in making it to the Ontario Hockey League, and there's 4 teams in the Western Hockey League that are interested in, 4 teams in the USHL that are interested in going to the Western Hockey League. So you're taking a look at somewhere between $15 to $20 million a franchise. Let's just call it 20 because my math isn't as good as yours. And if you have 6 teams, that's $120 million that are going to go to the CHL, specifically these 2 teams. There was talk in the Quebec League about them heading into New England. We'll find out. I don't think, and this is just kind of a teaser, if the CHL is successful in getting all of the best 16 and 17-year-olds, and the NHL draft is done now primarily out of the CHL draft, I'll give you a prediction. I don't think the NHL can stop what's going to happen with expansion in the CHL. The money is too great from an expansion standpoint. I believe the NHL right now is giving the CHL $9 million. Well, if you have 6 times $20 million, it's $120 million. When you save what the CHL is going to save when it comes to education packages, I think what you might see, just a prediction, what you might see is the CHL, who is now an associate member with Hockey Canada, you might just see them pull a USPHL or a BCHL and just say, the money's too great. We've got all the players. We're leaving. Mm-hmm. We'll find out, guys. The fifth thing, as far as the CHL strategy went, was if the CHL was getting the best 16 and 17, and they're not going to get all of them, but trust me, they're going to get players that they never thought they would get in the past under the old rules. If they've missed some, they're going to go back and get them at 18 and 19 years old. And Dan, Lucas, you have to remind me, because we have gone through the USHL rosters from last year, and it's very clear that the Canadian Hockey League is rating the United States Hockey League.
Yeah.
No question about it. Okay? And I will tell you this. I talked to a USHL coach yesterday who is out on the recruiting trail for kind of the first time in a long time. And the reason that he is because in the past, anybody who wanted to go to the NCAA under the old rules, the default was the USHL. It was the league. It's not the league anymore. It's the CHL. And now this coach is out there trying what he had to do in leagues that are lower than the USHL in America, having to recruit hockey players. And by the way, they're hockey players that aren't of the quality that would have been usually going to the United States Hockey League. So I think our predictions, guys, so far, and we'll show it, are pretty much bang on.
Yeah, Bob, one thing when it comes to the USHL, kind of a question for me as we look at this, one of the biggest lightning bolt points in our content that we posted this week were the numbers between the USHL and the NCAA when it came to current Division I commitments, right? That fired a lot of folks up. That fired a lot of questions up. The biggest question I have is, what does the future look like in recruiting in your mind in this brave new world where the best talent's going to the CHL, they're raiding the cupboard, teams are trying to get out of the USHL and move up to Canadian hockey? What does the recruiting trail look like? Does it start to become, for a player, right hand, left hand between the NCAA and the USHL? Are they pretty similar products now to a player?
Not even close. The numbers are an anomaly. Lucas, maybe flip us over to the freshmen from the 24-25 season and the commits that have happened since that point in time. So you'll see in 24-25, the USHL, 41%, 42% of the players, they were the league. And the BCHL was right there, and the NCAA was right there. And I think if the rules would have changed, because the BCHL was now outside of Hockey Canada, don't flip over yet, because they were outside of Hockey Canada, they were going to be able to recruit younger, more elite players who wanted to keep themselves NCAA eligible. I feel sorry for the BCHL. They made the right choice, and their numbers are going to go dramatically down. But switch over now and let's take a look at the commitments. Now, these are not freshmen yet, and these players who are commitments since the rule change, some of them will be coming in 25, 26, 26, 27, 28, 29, but you start getting a sense of where players are going to come from. And let's just start with the CHL before we get to the USHL and the NCAA. When I talk to Division I coaches, I talk to 17 Division I coaches, and I ask them one question right up front. When all the dust settles, what percentage of Division I hockey players are going to come from the CHL moving forward? And pretty much their answer was 50%. At the very lowest, it was 40%. And you can see right now, they're at 38.7% of all the commitments that were made prior to or right after the NCAA rule change. I would say that number is going to change, because if many or most of the best players, Canadian and American, are going to be playing in the CHL, it only makes sense that number over time is going to go up. Now let's switch to the USHL and the NCAA. This is where you have to really read into the numbers. If you take a look at the USHL, I expected their numbers to be down as far as these commitments go, because most of the players who were in the USHL this year already had commitments. There was no more commitments to be had. And that's why you only saw 47 commitments. You'll see that number dramatically go up. Okay. And let's just do some simple math. There was 486 freshmen in Division I NCAA hockey last year. Let's just call it 500 from a mass standpoint. And if it's true that 50% are going to come from the CHL moving forward, that means there's 250 left for everybody else. And what my prediction would be, the USHL is still a quality league. They're going to gobble up at least 200 of those commitments, which would leave 50 commitments for everybody else. Now, what will happen with the USHL and those 200 commitments? The quality of those commitments are going to go down. Take the development program out of it. And Lucas, you may want to make a note that we might want to talk about the development team moving forward. And in these numbers, the development team is included in the USHL numbers. But most of those kids from the development team were already committed before the deadline. So back to your question about the NOL and the USHL. If there's 250, I think these are rough numbers. If there's 250 that are going to come from the CHL, and there's 200 that are going to come from the USHL, then what's remaining is going to come from the rest.
Yeah.
And my guess is you're going to probably see an even split between the North American and the BCHL. And the rest are going to, you're going to have a couple that come from the OJ. You're still going to have young commitments. These are commitments now that are going to be made to youth hockey players. That number is not going to go down. It might go up. But when you take a look, don't talk commitments now. Let's talk about the actual freshmen that are in the NCAA. From year to year, you're going to see 50% CHL. You're going to see 250 USHL, or excuse me, CHL. You're going to see 200 USHL, and then the rest. But you're going to see commitments that are made from youth hockey that will then filter into the CHL, the BCHL, the USHL. And they'll play a couple of years of junior hockey there. So they've made their commitment at Mount St. Charles or the Toronto Marlies, or pick your high quality team. But then they'll go on and play for the Portland Winterhawks or the Sioux City Musketeers, or pick your team in the CHL or the USHL. Does that make sense, Dan?
Yeah, 100%. And I'll tell you, as this is going on right now, there is still more conversation going on about these numbers, gentlemen. There are still folks firing in as we go, asking where and why and how are these numbers true. And Bob, can you kind of dig into, we talk about since the rule change, you kind of clarified that in this USHL answer. Talk about just how this data pours in real quick, just to kind of give a look behind the curtain for the folks at home as we kind of don't give away the whole recipe, but let's give a look behind the curtain. How does this data pour in for you?
So I noticed one of the questions online is, are these players signed to the NCAA or are they commitments to the NCAA?
Yep.
And where all of the NCAA data comes from is from College Hockey Inc. And so when somebody is signed and they put it up on their website, and they list some of the data, we have to go deeper because they don't list all of the data that we would want. Like, are they NHL draft picks? What birth year are they? How old are they going to be when they enter the NCAA? A kid commits at 16, but he's not going to enter until the 27-28 season. All of this has to be factored in. And if I could make one suggestion to College Hockey Inc., this is the type of data that people are really, truly interested in. I remember when I was scouting in the Ontario Hockey League, and I would go watch prep school games in New England, I would get on the lineup sheet whether the player was a freshman, a sophomore, a junior, or a senior. Well, that was useless to me. What I needed was birth years, okay? And I would say that College Hockey Inc. is behind the curve of giving us complete data. They give us a lot of data, but complete data that we can use. And so therefore you're having to dig in. It's very time consuming. You're right. It was a month of just digging in and finding information. AI, as I've learned in the last week, has been unbelievable resource so that you can put all of this together. And until you put it all together, you can't really make the predictions that we're making here. And of course, some of these predictions are also based on historical and institutional knowledge that I or we would have. It comes from player agents in the National Hockey League who give you insight as far as where players may be going or what they may be doing. It comes from places like HockeyDB, for example, Elite Prospects. All of these are resources where you're digging in. And of course, listen, the data that we have today is always changing. A kid could commit to a school for the 26-27 season, and he could get deferred, right? Yeah. I mean, he could get decommitted. He may decide just not to go. His development may be so fast that the NHL team that drafted him want to put him in the American Hockey League. Or what happens if he grows 6 inches? He may end up being one of those select few that ends up jumping right into the National Hockey League. So it's a very fluid situation, but you're looking at the overall data here, guys, and what the trends are and what the hot information is out there from reliable sources to come up with the predictions that we've made in past pods and what we'll make moving forward.
And I will say that this is the great thing about data in kind of the overarching sense, right? Of like, you look at the difference between what leagues the freshmen are coming from and what league the commitments are coming from. And in folks' mind, that those might be two very similar bits of data, but they couldn't be more different in the sense of what you just explained, Bob, of, well, it's what league they're in when the commitment happens. And then the other stat of where do the freshmen come from is where they funnel to, right? So those stats, they work in tandem to try to provide a picture of what that pathway is. And the other thing I think you pointed out, and correctly so, is the idea that the data is a little skewed because of certain factors, right? In year one, there is always an overcorrection, right? A lot of people, especially the way they look at trends and things, is you say, well, when there's a big change, there's an overcorrection to one side. Then the next year, it might rubber band back in the other direction. And then it'll kind of settle in the middle a bit, right? So you are looking at some staggering number changes in year one. But I think, as you pointed out, Bob, there's going to be a bit of a reset, a bit of a settling. This is a multi-year process.
Yeah, I think most of the coaches and agents that I've talked to, whether it be in the CHL, the NCAA, it's going to be a 3-year process until all of the dust is settled. And listen, strategy, I'm going to talk about what we suggested for the NCAA strategy here in a second. Strategy and the execution of that strategy could skew the numbers as well. They can change the numbers, right? Yeah. Like, let's get into what we suggested for the NCAA. And maybe let's take a look at the graph, Lucas, of the age of the freshmen in the 24-25 season and compare it to what the commitments are for the players and when they're supposed to be entering. So our big advice, if the NCAA wanted to be the supplier to the National Hockey League, was they needed to get younger. And here we're going to show you organically how they got younger, because there was no, to my knowledge, any strategy that they had like the CHL had. CHL decided we want the best players. Instead of 2 Europeans, we're going to go to 3 Europeans. Yep. Okay? For the CHL draft, make a note. We got to show this later on. You'll notice massive numbers of Americans being drafted this year compared to the 24 drafts. Okay? So with the NCAA, our suggestion was, if a player is playing, if he's aged out in the CHL and you've taken him, and he would typically go to U Sport. Right now in the National Hockey League, I don't believe there was one regular player in the National Hockey League that came from U Sport. Now listen, maybe with all the training and everything that the NCAA has, maybe they'll change that. I don't think so. I think they're just going to be taking away scholarship liability from the CHL. But organically, they have gotten younger. And excuse me, what I've kind of highlighted here on this graph is the 17, 18, and 19-year-old freshmen that were in the NCAA this year. And it accounted for 89 players, which was 18.4% of the players in Division I hockey. And if you can just scroll over for a second, what you can see is that's changed a little bit. Those figures, the 17, 18, and 19, now these are commitments. They're not at the school yet, okay? Okay, anything could change this summer, okay? But it's gone up a significant amount to 27.4%. That's a significant organic jump. There was no strategy. Did you guys hear of any strategy coming from the NCAA hockey Division I people? I still have not heard or seen any comments from any of the commissioners controlling the narrative or telling us of a strategy that they have to become the official supplier to the National Hockey League. So organically, this has happened. You might ask, why has this happened? I think, let's start with nil. I mean, in talking to NHL agents, there's no money. There's no question that money is changing hands. How much money? I don't know. Guys, I mean, everybody's tight-lipped about it. Let's swirl the rumors here with McKenna, where I talked to probably the king of NHL insiders, who said that he's going to be going for somewhere between $350,000 and $500,000. And, so he's a generational player. What's a first-round pick, like the 4th overall pick in last year's NHL draft? Make a note, we're going to show all the kids that have flipped from the CHL to the NCAA to make up this 27.4% number for commitments coming forward. What's a Caden Lindstrom worth, who played in Medicine Hat last year? Is he worth $100,000? Is he worth $200,000? I don't know. Remember our favorite word back when we were talking about nil money before? Find your pagula. What schools have found their pagula? And how is the house settlement affecting all of this? I wish I could tell you all that. I mean, I'm still waiting for more lawsuits. They just said that they settled the lawsuit. I mean, I don't know. I can't tell you. What I can tell you is this. Let's just say that Caden Lindstrom got $100,000 from Michigan State. If he were to sign, like a lot of CHL players did who were drafted in the 24 draft, his signing bonus, his entry-level signing bonus, would have been $92,500. Let's just call it $100,000. He's going to sign an entry-level contract. He's not good enough. I shouldn't say that. He's not ready to play in the National Hockey League next year. Why wouldn't he go to Michigan State?
Yeah.
He's going to be playing against bigger, stronger, faster people. Let's just call it what it is. Take the London Knights who won the Memorial Cup and put them up against Western Michigan, who isn't even a blue blood. And I'm telling you, Michigan is going to win that game. I'm not saying they're more talented. I'm not saying that. But they're bigger, stronger, and faster. So where is a Caden Lindstrom going to prepare himself better? And in his mind, and I think a lot of other players' minds, it's going to be less games, more time in the weight room, more time with skills, coaching, to prepare him for the next jump, which is when he's going to sign his ELC, whether it be next year or the following year, and he's going to double dip. If he plays 2 years at Michigan State and he's getting $100,000 a year, he collects $300,000, not $100,000. And why would Caden Lindstrom sign an ELC right now and get his 92.5? And if he's not ready for the National Hockey League, the rules the way they are right now means that he has to go back to the CHL and collect his stipend of, is it $60 a week? I mean, it's a no-brainer. So how much money is out there? I don't know. Yeah. Are there new blue bloods that have found their pagula? Will there be new blue bloods who find their pagula? I don't know. But if you take a look at that number of commits since the rule change, which has affected this age, there's 395. If you take that mathematically to 484, that red number that we have is 118 are going to fill that 27.4%. Well, that's 118 in this age bracket that are true prospects, okay, compared to 89. Where do I think the NCAA needs to be? If I was running the NCAA, they would be at 50% minimum. Because what you're talking about here, because what we recommended, what I've been recommending for 25 years, 30 years, is if the NCAA ever took all 64 of their teams right now, and they said, we're only going to recruit freshmen and true freshmen, where would they be scouting hockey players? Right in the CHL. They'd all be right there. And they wouldn't be looking at the age outs that typically have no chance of ever playing in the National Hockey League. They would be forced to recruit the younger players who do have the potential to play in the National Hockey League. Will the Blue Bloods, if they did that, would the Blue Bloods get the first, second, and third rounders? Of course they would. But you know what? If a non-blue blood finds his pagula and has the money, maybe they turn into a blue blood, right?
We cannot forget, no matter what pie in the sky idea we want the NCAA to go after, no matter what changes we want to be made, that this is still an institution that cannot legally make these changes we're asking for. They cannot force 18 and 19-year-olds to be freshmen. They cannot enforce those types of rules. They can't enforce right now nil, right? They can't limit nil without legal action being immediately taken in any way, shape, or form. This is an organization that, because of its federal ties and funding, it is at the whim right now of seeing where legality plays out before it can do anything. So right now we sit in a world where we may love to see 18, 19-year-old freshmen. It may help the sport of hockey, but it is not an issue in any other NCAA sport except for hockey. This is the one-off. This is the only one. And it's 64 schools. This is not loud enough, and no one other than the three gentlemen in this room are talking about this loud enough to make any change, any wave happen for the sport of hockey. And that's my biggest worry in all this, Bob.
So, guys, there's a reason why most of the NCAA teams are older, because most of them don't feel that they can get these elite 17 and 18 and 19-year-old NHL draft picks. And when BU is getting, or BC or Denver or Michigan State, or pick whatever blue blood you want, when they're getting all the best kids from the national development team, and when they're getting now all the best kids who are willing to flip from the CHL, I don't blame the coaches in the NCAA who are not blue bloods for wanting to be older. Their job is to win hockey games. So you can't blame them for being older. When I take a look at why the NCAA isn't younger, from a strategy standpoint, I take a look at, and we talked about this, the leadership. Okay? Why have the commissioners not gotten together with a bunch of influential coaches and come up with a plan? Okay, maybe it's not true freshmen and true freshmen plus a year. Maybe like the OHL, you can have a couple of overages. Okay, Lucas, I think in a previous podcast, you had recommended that, say, Hockey East and the Big Ten might make their own rules to be younger.
Yep.
Okay, and some of the weaker conferences, let's call them, they might have different rules to be older because they all meet in one place at the end trying to win a national championship. But if the NCAA is serious about being the supplier to the National Hockey League, they have to get younger. And, you know, we in a previous podcast, we talked about it's in the best interest of the coaches to do this, to get younger. And the reason I say that is if you have elite players on your roster that are true NHL prospects that every NHL team wants to see, you're going to have NHL general managers, presidents, directors of amateur scouting. You're going to have them in your building. And the relationships that you form because they're in your building are advantageous for you to make that jump to the next level, which is pro hockey. If you remember back in one of our podcasts, I made a comparison between an OHL coach and a USHL coach. One was Peter DeBoer in the OHL. One was Kevin Hartzell in the USHL. Both outstanding coaches. Both winning percentages, I believe, like .680 over a long period in both of their leagues. Why is Peter DeBoer, well, he's not in the NHL right now. He's getting a paycheck from the NHL, but he'll be back in the NHL because he's one of the premier coaches. That guy had the best Europeans on his roster, like a Gabriel Landeskog, and he had a whole bunch of the best Canadians and Americans. I mean, if you're an NCAA coach and you have that, you're forming those types of relationships. And when I hear coaches in, say, the BCHL or the NOL or even the USHL, when I hear them say, I talk to NHL people all the time, I have no doubt that they do, but not at the same level that CHL does. Not even close, right? The CHL is the predominant breeding ground for coaches and management moving forward. That's not to say there are not great coaches in the NCAA. There are. I mean, the coach of Denver could be coaching in the NHL right now. I mean, you know, David Quinn's moved up. I mean, there's all kinds of them. But I think if you take a look at the people that have moved up from the NCAA into pro hockey, what's been the consistent factor on their team? They've had elite players. And they formed relationships, strong relationships with NHL people.
Well,
so,
Bob, I will say one thing is that, you know, you've listed quite a few things that I think need to happen in order for the NCAA to grow stronger, to actually take advantage of a little bit of this up in the air, because that's what it is right now, right? Everything is up in the air. There's never been a better time to assert yourself, right? Whether you're a wannabe Pagula, that you might be able to just pick a random team and just be the Pagula for that team at this point, right? Because as much as there's influence from these blue blood schools, influence is only half the battle, right? It's the support, it's the monetary support that comes along with that. So if for the NCAA to really take advantage of this, they need to get together. And then Dan points out that, well, legally, they can't do a lot of the things that we're trying to get them to do, that we're continuing to suggest. And I think the message now, having gone through Hockey 101 for months and months and months, and we've been saying over and over that there needs to be stronger leadership. I think at this point, the message has to just be, you cannot win this battle. You cannot assert yourself. You cannot be a part of the changing landscape without objective leadership. And I mean objective as in you don't live and die based on the success of individual teams. We've all worked in hockey. We know that you don't trust coaches with operations, right? With team level operations. They coach and that's what they do. You can't really ask owners to really get involved in the objective running of a league, to make decisions that might be good for the league but bad for them personally, right? We know that that's difficult. So what you need is someone that doesn't care whether one team is good or bad, whether one team might be a little bit harder hit by something, if it means the betterment of the body at whole. So I think now more than ever, there needs to be a push. It's a survival push at this point. You have to find a way to get somebody in charge.
And I just do want to jump in real quick. As the youngest guy on this podcast, the fact that both of you are fighting so hard for ageism in the sport of hockey, sad. Sad for both of you, okay?
Dan, you're just a young person who doesn't get it. That's at the end of the day.
Good luck the first time a 21, 22-year-old can somehow make some sort of argument that they would have made a cut, they would have gotten a commitment, they'd be playing on a roster if they weren't 22. That's tough to fight the federal government about.
Dan, are you going to argue? Well, maybe you can, because there's been a commitment of a 25-year-old in the NCAA.
I don't think it's good for the game. I don't think it's good.
That's crazy. I will say this. I've always believed that the strength of the CHL has been their leadership. For 30 years, all three leagues had the same leader. Now it's turned over now, but that leadership was so strong, and their goal was always the same. Let's get the best players, regardless of their nationality. Let's get the best players in our league. And how do we do it? And the player procurement process is much different. It's a draft process in the CHL as opposed to a recruiting process. Forget about what the process is. You just need some guidance. And guys, I still have not seen any guidance from the NCAA side. And I would also add this. NIL's only going to take you so far. You have to have a better mousetrap. And getting together, Lucas, I think you're bang on. They have to get together and form a strategy rather than just sending out 64 teams to go recruit. I'll give you an example. And we talked about it on the pod a long time ago. The 10 years or whatever that I spent in the Ontario Hockey League, you could draft, when I was in the Sioux, we could draft an American from anywhere in America. And it didn't make sense. Like, is a kid from California really going to play in the queue? Is a kid from Maryland really going to go out to the West? Yes, in certain situations. However, it's better if they can be closer to home, number one. And using your scouting resources standpoint, what the CHL did was the right thing. They divided up America. Everything west of the Mississippi, every player west of the Mississippi became the property of the CHL or of the Western Hockey League, and only the Western Hockey League could draft them. New England became the Quebec League. and everything in between, east of the Mississippi, from New York State all the way down to Florida, became the OHL. So they made a strategic move. I'm not suggesting that for the NCAA, obviously, but they have to make some type of come up with some type of a plan, a strategy, so that they can execute it. And to this point in time, we haven't seen any rule changes. We haven't seen any coordinated effort to change the narrative. When McKenna signs with whoever he's going to sign with, that's going to change the narrative dramatically. But that's not a plan. That's one team coming up and signing a hockey player. And as we mentioned earlier, they have to use College Hockey Inc. as a recruiting tool. I suggested that it be their central scouting. Think about what College Hockey Inc. was before the rule change. Their job was to educate and inform all of the elite players in North America to keep their eligibility. Well, they don't have to keep their eligibility anymore. So what's College Hockey Inc. going to do right now? And I don't want to get into that tonight, but narrative, rules, College Hockey Inc. In this new world where CHL players can play, are going to be really important, and I'm waiting for something from the NCAA that I have yet to see. Let's talk about nationality, guys, because this is really interesting. So if you take a look in 24-25, the freshmen, these are the players in the NCAA, 59% came from USA, 30% came from Canada, 11% came from Europe. Holy moly. I mean, slide it over just a little bit so I could see it. The USA went from 59% to right now, the commitments. These aren't freshmen yet. They're not on campus, but this is the data that we have, and it's large enough data. We're talking basically 400 players who have made commitments. It's a total flip between Canada and the United States. Europe's basically where they were before, 11%. Now they're down to 8.1%. I mean, this is telling. Now, don't conflict nationality with what league the player is going to be coming from, because there's going to be a lot of Americans coming from the CHL. Okay? But the college coaches are in the job of securing the best players to help them win hockey games, win their conference, get to the national tournament, win a national championship. That's all they care about. Maybe USA Hockey cares that this number has dropped dramatically, and I'm sure in the hearts of most college coaches that they would like to see the numbers, if they're American, where they were. But I think the college coaches are more concerned about how they're going to make their next mortgage payment, car payment, and kids' tuition payments. And to do that, they need to grab what they think are the best players. And what they're telling us right now is the best players are coming out of Canada.
And these numbers are, you're talking about 50% changes for you percent folks out there. You're talking about numbers, the Canadian numbers going up by magnitudes. You're talking about the American players being cut in half, right? So these are big changes. And I would even say that, even accounting for the fact that in this first year, we knew that we were going to see some numbers that were particularly inflated, this, I think, certainly falls outside the standard deviation of what you might consider to be normal in year one of a shakeup. You're talking about massive swings here. And the one thing I will point out in these totals as well, you have 486 freshmen and 395 players that we've accounted for so far. So you've got less than 100 players, quote unquote, left. right? If we want to start to have a little bit more comparison on these numbers, that's enough to swing if one country, if one nationality takes a majority of them. But I think what we're seeing is if the percentages hold even roughly, right? Even if you look at the normal 5-6% swings, Canada is the outright winner so far. The USA has taken a massive step behind. And I think for European players, it's always been a little bit up in the air. But right now you are seeing a noticeable drop there as well. It's just the numbers in this category specifically are so staggering. I was happy that we led with these numbers when we were kind of teasing with the data, because I think this really goes to show you how much of a shakeup there is. And Bob, to your point about coaches, I think it's another reason exactly why the coaches need to coach, and then there needs to be something else above them, right? Because coaches are worried about keeping their job. We're seeing coaches get fired left and right for nearly nothing, right? DeBoer gets fired after this season. You might disagree with his methods. You go to the NBA, you see Tibbs getting fired after leading the Knicks to the Eastern Conference Finals. Coaching is a volatile position. There's not a lot of stability there. The only stability comes from the wins and losses. And even then, depending on the expectations of your program, that's not enough. So I think coaches will certainly, if they can't get the person they want, they'll take the best available people regardless of where they come from. But they're thinking about this year. They're not so much thinking about next year or the year after, especially now that we're dealing with things like nil and transfer portal.
Guys, before we keep moving here, I want to put out some numbers that I have here that I looked up.
Hold on, young man.
Really cutting me off. Whose name's on the show?
I want to get this out because I'm an old man and I'll forget it.
Go ahead. That's fine.
That's fair.
Okay. So this 56%, 35%, 8%. I really think where you're going to see the numbers land, guys, if you, Lucas, we've got a chart for where players come, where they come from in the National Hockey League. So, Dan, if you take a look at nationality of players in the National Hockey League, I mean, where all they care, all they truly care about are the best players. You can see where it's at.
Yeah.
Canada's 41, USA is 24. So there's still a discrepancy. Now, listen, you're going to have guys at USA Hockey say registration numbers are up in America and they're down in Canada. And so maybe over the long term, maybe that will play out. Maybe demographics are different. Maybe the cost to play hockey in America, which is dramatically more expensive than it is in Canada, is going to start chopping the knees off in America. And maybe that number will go down. I don't know. But that's the number today, is where players are coming from if you're taking a look at Canada and the United States.
Here's the numbers I want to point out for folks at home. And I think these are the numbers that you'll fall on one side of the coin. Either let's go NCAA coaches, figure it out yourselves, or USA Hockey needs to clean its act up. Because the biggest numbers are this. When you look at the NCAA, does lacrosse have an issue with this ruling allowing players from Canada in the CHL or players with this sort of status? Does lacrosse have an issue with those players coming and playing Division I getting scholarships? Not at all. 126 Division I teams. Does soccer have this issue? No. 205 Division I teams. Does Division I basketball have this issue? Not at all. They love an AAU prospect coming in who's made some money. 364 Division I basketball teams. Football, any issue? No chance. Does anybody have an issue with this? If they do, they're Nick Saban and they're working on TV right now. 263 Division I football teams. 300 plus baseball teams. These sports, these blue blood sports, do not have this issue. The only sport with this issue is our great sport of hockey. And right now, there is so much fracturing in the sport here in the United States. Private equity is absolutely working to destroy some of these leagues around the country and some of these games, some of these teams, while at the same time, USA Hockey is fractured into multiple leagues with multiple ideologies. And what we need more than ever right now is growth in that number. If you want the NCAA to stop in the midst of what it's dealing with and care about our sport, 64 Division I teams isn't enough. Losing AIC isn't acceptable. Like, this cannot be all on the coaches It cannot be all on conference commissioners to take a chance, and hopefully we don't get sued when we make a new legislation against our teams, or hopefully I'm a coach and I won't get fired when I go 0-25 because I've got the youngest team in the nation and we're all going to the NHL and losing hockey games. Maybe this is on some of these bigger folks out there who don't want to listen to anybody, who collect their paycheck year in and year out and do nothing to better our game. Maybe that's it. I don't know. Maybe I'm screaming from the pulpit here, but I feel like that's where I'm at, Lucas, is there has to be more done to grow this game. There has to be finances given to grow this game in the SEC, in the ACC, in conferences that I don't, non-hockey market. Florida's won the cup 5 years in a row. What are we talking about non-hockey market? Go to Fort Lauderdale. Tell me that feels like ice should be made when Florida was raising that cup. It certainly doesn't. The elbow room's a great time, ladies and gents, but it is not a hockey-centric neighborhood, okay? Like, wake up. This game has to wake up. We have people chiming in all over the place, blaming this, blaming that. Our sport is to blame right now, and we need growth, and we need investment, and we need the right people involved in this game to weed out all these wrong people that have taken it over.
So Dan, I've always said it would be great if we had the UCLA Bruins and the USC Trojans and the Florida Gators and, pick your big name school, the Georgia Bulldogs. Costs a lot of money to start up an NCAA program. I mean, you're going to probably start with $200 million, I guess, to build a facility. I don't know. Maybe it's more than that. I'm not a builder. And then you have to be able to fund it. Yep. And so, and then it has to be able to stand on its legs financially, right, over time after the initial investment. I would suggest that if the NCAA was the primary feeder to the National Hockey League, as the National Hockey League grows, so would the NCAA. If we were watching the NHL playoffs and the vast majority of players came from the University of Maine, and it was said that, or the University of Vermont, okay? Can you imagine the growth in the game in America if all of a sudden it was a Georgia Bulldog or a Maryland Tarpon or a Florida Gator? So I've always believed over the last 30 years, until the NCAA can be the official supplier to the National Hockey League, it's really hard to find the juice.
Yeah. Yep.
To have these schools invest in hockey. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but like hockey's growing in America. I live in Florida. I'm in Toronto right now, but I live in Florida. I could tell you in Tampa, hockey's a big deal. Now with the success in Miami area, it's a big deal. Hockey's growing. We lived in the bubble in the USPHL. I lived in those arenas with you guys. It's growing at a youth level. It's growing because of those NHL teams. Imagine if you had NCAA teams. I just think they're missing the boat. Division I hockey is missing the boat. I think the NHL is missing the boat.
Yeah.
I think the NHL needs to have all the players come from the NCAA. We said this. I've said this for 30 years, and I said it on the pod, and I'll say it again. The NHL is better served if it's an Ohio State Buckeye or a Michigan Wolverine or a Denver Pioneer. Americans know that. That's where there is opportunity for growth for the game from a monetary standpoint. There's no more money that you're going to get out of Canada. So why isn't the NHL behind, truly behind, and part of this plan of growing the game? I think I've said this on the pod. I think Gary Bettman's the greatest commissioner I've ever seen in my entire life. I love Gary Bettman. Okay, we could talk about why I love him in another pod. For a guy who's growing revenues like he has, I don't understand why he is not all behind this. But maybe we'll find out someday.
Well, my real quick pitch for you, the way you solve this, it has to be at a professional level. When you talk about legality, you can't do it at the NCAA level. You know, the NBA solves this issue. You need 1 year in the NCAA to be eligible for the draft. That's legal. You can do that as a professional entity. You can have stipulations for how an employee comes into your office. You got to have a degree to work for me. You have to have X, you have to have Z. You can create a world where you need to have played a year in the NCAA or a year of pro hockey. And that eliminates this issue. All of a sudden, I'm 18 years old. I'm that blue blood. I'm that guy. I'm going to Michigan. It's a no-brainer. I want to be ready to be drafted. I want to be ready to go play. I want to be able to play for the New York Rangers as quick as possible and lose as many games as possible in front of a Garden crowd. That's what I want to be ready to do. And I think that's your answer. Your answer, again, it comes back to we're shouting at coaches, we're shouting at the little guys, while the big guys behind the screens are just sitting there letting it happen. And we need action from the bigger folks in this game.
The commercials that the NCAA, not NCAA hockey, but the NCAA run through their national championships, specifically during the basketball tournament, where they talk about we develop professionals, but they're not talking about professional athletes.
I love that. That.
It's a great commercial. And listen, the hockey coaches, if we're talking about the NCAA, their job is to win hockey games, but it becomes a lot harder for them to get the players that they want if they don't take care of the people that they have. And I think you'll find the greatest coaches and general managers at any level, National Hockey League all the way down, are the ones who do that. And they have long-term success. And the others have no success or very short-term success. And so it's time to transition. It's time to transition into some deductions and to look at some more numbers, guys.